Good afternoon, everybody. Ken and others are famous for saying the only reason to be a leader is if you have a desire to serve. Whether it's serving your team, serving your community, serving your family, or serving the world. Servant leadership is about serving something bigger than you. Servant leadership isn't about taking on the role of a servant and being less of a human being. It's about taking on the role of a servant and being more. Why? Because that is exactly how we were made. Think about your own life and be honest with yourself. Don't you ultimately feel the best when you're serving? Don't you ultimately feel the greatest joy? Doesn't your life have the most purpose when you are serving? Serving your spouse, serving your others, serving your kids, your organization, or your community. One of the greatest servant leaders of all time talked about faith, hope, and love. And he proclaimed that the greatest of these is love. I'm pretty convinced, and I think you are as well, that he was not excluding business when he said this. Now let me ask you a question. What does that love look like when it's lived out loud? What does it look like at home or in business or in the world? The answer is service. We most often express our love for others by serving them, don't we? How many of you have sacrificed something to make life better for your spouse or your significant other? Show me your hands. Here's one. How many of you have worn yourself out by taking your kids from one activity to the next and the next? Yep. How many of you have gone the extra mile to help an associate, somebody that works with you, just so they can get better at what they do? Show me your hands. That's right. And how many of us do some sort of charity work, some volunteer work in our communities? Show your hand. That's right. Why do we do these things? We do them because of love. Love for our loved ones, love for our employees, love for our companies, our communities, and our country. The greatest character strength that we have and our virtue is love. And what does love look like? It looks like service. The problem with servant leadership is that it's an easy term to throw around. It's a lot easier to talk about than it is to actually practice. In fact, I would tell you that over my lifetime, from a crossing guard patrol captain in elementary school to a patrol leader in the Boy Scouts to a 30-year career in the electric cooperative movement, I have experienced and I have delivered the best and, quite embarrassingly, the worst of leadership. Where were you when you first heard the term servant leader? I don't mean where were you standing, where were you in life? Well, I'd been in the business world for almost 20 years before I heard it explained in the context of the vision of Ken Blanchard. Through my life, I've had experiences where my leadership things have gone right and they have gone horribly wrong. And until I understood what servant leadership meant, I always wanted to be a leader worth following. The journey that I'm going to take you on today is a story about how we can transform the world. How we can show what love looks like as it's expressed through service. For me, servant leadership is a journey. You can talk to my team back in the corner and they will tell you that I have not arrived. I'm a work in progress. Servant leadership is an aspiration for me. It's something that I strive for, and it's something that I hope you strive for too. Because servant leadership is a legacy. It's a legacy that I hope to leave behind in some way. In preparing for today, I wanted to share just a few stories with you about my leadership journey. I can remember in my 20s, my first real job as a supervisor, I was leading a team of men. They were construction inspectors, building power line and building substations. These guys were the tough crowd. Every one of them was old enough to be my father, and every one of them acted like somebody that I knew in high school. They were a wild bunch. But I would tell them what to do, and they would do it. I would say do A, they would do A. I'd explain I needed B done, they would do B. I would go home, I would ask my wife to do C, and nothing happened. And I was pretty upset about this, and my boss at the time, his name was Steve G. Steve is an ex-Marine. And I was talking to him, I said, Steve, I don't understand it. I can tell these guys what to do, and they do it. And I go home, and I cannot tell my wife to do anything. And Steve, if I can do his imitation, he pulled his glasses down like this, and we're sitting at the desk, and he looks at me over his glasses, and he says, well, easy money, that was my nickname for Steve, or his for me, easy money. It's like this. Those guys don't do your laundry. Now, before you throw stuff at me, and I see some of you picking up some things, you have to remember that was 30 years ago, and that was a tough crowd. And since then, I have learned many, many very valuable life lessons, the least of which is how to do my own laundry. But I can tell you that we are the same person at work as we are at home. And you have got to learn to serve at home. I had no idea at the time how pride or ego could get in the way of a leader. I'm sure, like me, you've had lots of experience with people with very large ego. I noticed that those people that were led by people with ego had a pretty tough go. And I learned that leaders that had their ego in check, although I didn't really understand it, their people were happy, they made more effective leaders. And at the time, I wasn't equipped to understand why. I just knew what I saw. And through our lives, we will all be affected by leaders. Some really good, some not so good. But if you can take one thing away from each leadership experience, your journey will be enriched. My grandfather was one of my important leaders. And you know, my grandfather was raised during the Depression. And to my grandpa, the measure of the worth of a man was how hard he could work. My grandfather started his newspaper route at 4 a.m. He went to the door, he put on the hat, he took the coat off the coat rack, put on the coat, he went out, he did a paper route, he came home, and he had to be home by 6 o'clock. And you know why? Because that's when his dad needed the hat. That's when his dad needed the coat to go to work. So for my grandfather, great leaders worked nonstop. They were tireless. And they were also very good providers. In my early 20s, one of my leaders was a gentleman by the name of Master Jack Wong. Master Wong taught me Taekwondo, and eventually I was in a position to teach Taekwondo to students myself. And I learned in this process that in order to be truly proficient, you have to give knowledge away. Whether you're teaching people how to move, or whether you're teaching people what's important in life and how not to give up when things get really tough, proficiency is realized as you give your knowledge to others. Now, my most influential person in my career was a guy by the name of Doug Bursey. Doug was old school. He made those inspectors that I worked with look like nothing. Doug was a big man, and at the time, I thought he was 12 foot tall, but I think he was only about 6'2". And I was working in Alaska, and my office was actually attached to our office building via a walkway, and it was a trailer. And I would hear Doug walking in, and my trailer would shake. Doug didn't try to intimidate you, but if he did, he considered it a plus. There was lots of people that ran screaming into the night to not work for Doug, but you know what? I loved working for Doug Bursey. Because Doug Bursey's expectations were so great that I felt like I did the impossible. It wasn't always easy, but Doug would never ask you to do something that you knew he couldn't do himself, that he wouldn't try to do himself. He was tough. He had great expectations, and I think the reason that I loved Doug happened one time when we were on our way home and we were called to a hospital. And Doug Bursey, this big man, 6'2", the guy that shook the hallway when he walked, talked to a wife of a lineman who had just been killed in an electrocution accident. Doug was expressing his condolences, and Doug, the tough guy, my boss, later my friend, was crying like a baby. Leaders worth following have great expectations, but they have even greater heart. These are just a few of my stories, and the reason I'm sharing these with you is because I want you to know where I was when the board of directors at Powder River Energy hired me to my first and only CEO position. It would suffice to say that I was not a highly evolved servant leader. I hadn't heard the term. It's fair to say that I was prepared to work harder than anyone. I was comfortable in giving direction. I had a great sense of values. I would never quit. I realized having heart was important, although the thought of openly showing that I had heart was absolutely the most frightening thing. This is the start of my story today. It's about facing reality, finding the courage to change, and leading at a higher level. I hit the ground running when I started working at Precorp. We were involved in developing a natural gas reserve that was the biggest natural gas reserve in the country at the time. Our system was growing by leaps and bounds. I mean, really growing. We built on the average, if you took a look at statistics across the country, we built the average electric co-op once a year for about 5 years straight. 300 or more miles of power line, 25 megawatts of load, which is no small amount. We were driving 100 miles an hour going down the road fast. Well, things were breaking. So I want you to hop in the car with me, okay? We're driving down the road at 100 miles an hour. We have a destination we have to get to. The country needs the gas, and the car is braking as we drive it. And I ask you, lean out the window and tighten that lug nut. Open up the hood and put in a new camshaft. Well, we were driving 100 miles an hour and doing maintenance on the car as we were going, and things were breaking left and right. I remember this board meeting. Now I report to 10 directors, and because we're a rural electric cooperative, they're all agricultural people. They're good businessmen. The ones in Wyoming are also cowboys, believe it or not. And we were talking about our audit report and the fact that inventory was off. Inventory was more than off. Inventory was broken. not quite half our stuff was missing. And one of our directors was saying, help me to understand why this is happening. Well, our pole count is off. Our wire count is off. And Walt Christensen looked at me and said, you know what, Mike? I'm just a rancher, but I know how to count. I count my cows. I count my hay. I count my pastures. I don't understand why it is that you guys can't count poles. Because the last time I looked, poles don't move. It was pretty embarrassing. And we had to do some innovative things to fix that. We had to do some innovative things to survive the coal bed methane wave as it crashed all around us. They talk about opportunity coming when you least expect it. Well, we had tons of opportunity for several years. Another pivotal moment in my life as a leader occurred. The first one is the September 11th terrorist attack, and also the commissioning of our first employee opinion survey. The shock of 9/11 sent ripples through our community. I'm sure it did for you too. As a matter of fact, me personally, after 9/11, I felt like I had to be better than I was the day before. Did you feel that way too? Many of us did. We felt connected. We had to get better. Something had to change. But at the same time, after that, we were bombarded by negativity. We were bombarded by fear. We were consumed by anxiety, and our communities were suffering. And I decided to do something that is absolutely one of the most wild ideas that I've ever had in my life, and I don't know why I had it. But we decided to do a bus tour, and we brought on board 2 National Football League ex-players, Super Bowl 20 heroes, a gentleman by the name of Brian Holloway. You might not know him, but the other guy that came along with him was this little football player by the name of William Perry. You remember him, the fridge? Yeah, he's still that big. We went around our community. We toured the small communities in our 16,200 square mile service territory, and we tried to breathe some hope into the people. We call this
bringing people
our celebration
together,
of championship communities.
And a vision of many people around the world. At Powder River Energy, we began the Celebration of Championship Communities Tour this year as a means to come together. During the tour, Powder River Energy recognized many people in Northeast Wyoming who work to make their community a better place to live. We hope you recognize them too. Keeping people and customers first. Powder River Energy Corporation, a Touchstone Energy cooperative.
Me in that video is the faces of people. They were smiling, and that was not something that was very common at the time. You know, I learned that as leaders, as servant leaders, we have got to be equipped to dispense hope. I was riding pretty high on this event. I felt 10 feet tall and bulletproof, and I decided to commission our first employee opinion survey. And I can tell you, after doing that survey and getting some brutal feedback, little did I know that the war in terror wasn't the only war that was going on at the time. I'd like you to hear from Dolly Schlerette talking a little bit about our first employee opinion survey.
When Mike asked me to talk about the first employee opinion survey we did after he started here, I thought, no, all I remember about that was how painful and awful it was hearing the results. It was one of those where you think, why did we even ask? Or, be careful what you ask for because they might tell you. The survey came about 1 year after Mike had been at Precorp, and the coal bed methane industry was really starting to boom in our service territory, so we were really, really busy. It was also a little over a year since the interim manager, prior to my coming here, had fired 2 employees after sending an email to the entire company the night before that basically stated you would find out tomorrow morning whether you had a job here or not. So needless to say, there was still a strong lack of trust and fear. Morale had definitely been the lowest that I had ever seen it in the almost 20 years that I had been here at that time. The survey was about 6 open-ended questions, and believe me, they were very blunt and very hurtful comments made. I was actually surprised that Mike didn't just pack up and leave rather than face the challenges ahead. And boy, there were challenges with the coal bed methane boom doubling the size of our territory of our company in just a matter of a few years. It was a lot to take on, and thankfully he did stay, and through a lot of determination and commitment and learning opportunities and listening to the employees, like he's had a yearly employee opinion survey done every year through a consultant. With that feedback and all of that, he's led us successfully through the storm, and I feel we are a much stronger, better prepared company today.
Dolly describes the survey. She talks about employees having a lack of trust. I would submit to you that this comment on our all-employee opinion survey is the epitome of a lack of trust. I'll give you a second to read that. Mr. Easley can detect which response is their response by a code on the letter, the color of the envelope, or some other magical way. This was pretty crazy. Another comment that I'd like to share with you that sort of set the stage is this one. Precorp needs to find a new manager, CEO, because the one that we have is an apprentice, and we're just too busy for that. You know, I can look at this and smile today, but I wasn't smiling back then. And you know why I wasn't smiling? Because when things get personal, it hurts, doesn't it? It does. But you know what? What hurt even worse was that I had to come to the brutal reality that I was not serving our people. I wasn't serving them like they needed to be served, and I was not serving them like I thought I needed to. So like any of us, I drew on my past leadership experiences, and I drew on my time with Master Jack Wong. If you know much about martial arts, you know that each level gets tougher, more intense, more physically and mentally challenging, and I was feeling all of the above. But I drew on my values. I didn't draw on anything but what was inside. Courtesy, integrity, perseverance, self-control, and indomitable spirit. These are the 5 aims to achieve for Taekwondo. I'm glad I had them in my toolkit. You know, leaders worth following have to be mentally tough and emotionally predictable. We have to be a rock for our organization. We need to be tough as nails. We can't be mean about it, and we have got to have a tender heart. I was determined to make positive change, and luckily enough, somebody had heard about our Celebration of Championship Communities tour, and I was invited to be a panelist at the Cooperatives annual meeting of the Cooperatives. This is our national association, and this is the cooperative network. Many of you probably don't know what electric cooperative is, but imagine this. It's an electric utility that's owned by the customers, that's ran on democratic principles of one member, one vote. Electric cooperatives began their heroic journey of democratizing electrical energy supply to rural America back in the 30s. That's our model. We come together once a year, we talk politics, we talk vision, we talk strategy, we get some training. And at this particular meeting, I had the opportunity to be on a panel with Kevin Freiberg. Now, Kevin was flying high and telling the story about Southwest Airlines in their book, Nuts. You all know Southwest Airlines. It's a company that keeps their employees first, creates raving fans out of their customers, and provides them world-class service. And isn't that an interesting concept for customer-owned electric utilities? Well, after the presentation, I had the opportunity to visit with Kevin. I was pretty scared because he was a pretty world-famous guy, and I was just the CEO from a little co-op in northeast Wyoming. And I know that I knew that I needed help, and I had an idea that maybe Kevin could help me. Now, if you're a member of a not-for-profit co-op, and you're going to ask a best-selling author and a world-class management guru for help, you have to be creative. I think I was pretty creative because the conversation went something like this. Kevin, I'm just from a little remember this word, not-for-profit co-op. I need help. You saw what I'm up against. You know what? I doubt that our co-op could ever afford to hire you. And I was wondering, do you do any charity work? Well, Kevin and I eventually figured out how to work together. Kevin helped me to understand the power of building a culture and the power of creating focus through a well-articulated mission and vision. And then in 2005, Kevin planted the seed in me of the idea to change, to grow, to enroll in what would be the Ken Blanchard Executive MBA program at Grand Canyon University. I was ready for change. I had faced reality. And as servant leaders, when we face reality, remember the story. It's okay to have a wild and crazy idea. It's okay to push the envelope. Sometimes it hurts to know that you have a weakness. You have to know how to ask for help. You can't ignore problems, and you can't fix something that you don't know about. And you need to be mentally tough, emotionally predictable, and have a tender heart without being mean. Finding the courage to change. The Executive MBA program required of my time, I tried to keep track of it, and I think that I did, somewhere between 100 and 120 hours a month extra time. Every class that I took, everything that I learned, I tried to bring one thing back to my staff to try to make our organization just a little bit better. And this helped us survive the coal bed methane boom. At the end of that coal bed methane boom, and at the end of the MBA class, my staff actually thought that they had completed it as well because I gave them so much homework. When we survived the CBM boom, we were tired. We had had a tough road to hoe. I was worn out. I think the organization was worn out. In 2010, our employee opinion survey numbers took a pretty big decline. We were beginning to understand that the boom was over. I needed another drink at the well of Ken Blanchard and his leadership vision. I needed a few hugs too. So I came back to the Client Summit last March. I went to the Servant Leadership Immersion class, and I realized something. I realized that I needed to change. I realized that the company needed to change. And I also came to the brutal fact that if I wanted anything to change, I had to start with myself. And so we worked pretty hard on that. You know, the servant leadership class gave me a fresh perspective. And after being with Ken and Margie and the wonderful Blanchard people for a year of my life, I thought I would have had this down pat, but I didn't. I realized that empathy in a leader is important. And you know why that's important? Because if you have empathy, then you know what it's like to be around you. And that's important if you're trying to lead people. That way, at least you have something in common with them. If you can empathize with your employees and your team members, they will feel empowered. If they feel empowered, they will embrace your leadership. And if they embrace your leadership, guess what, folks? It's easier to empathize. And the cycle goes on, good things happen. But for me, this takeaway just wasn't enough. There was something else that was missing, and I really couldn't figure out what it was at the time. The Pre-Corp organization was going into decline. I was wondering, was I the right leader for Pre-Corp? Was I the guy that was going to be able to take this company to the next level for the next business cycle? And then I went to the Optimal Motivation Beta. And I realized as I watched what was happening in that beta that there was something here. There was a kernel of truth. There was some theme that was running through this new idea that I wanted to know more about. Now, Lori tells you that I'm sort of nice, but I can tell you I had her arm twisted behind her back, and I was whining at her with every ounce of energy to become involved in this Optimal Motivation program. And we eventually had the beta. And in preparing for the beta, I got way, way, way ahead of the curve, and I tried to analyze myself. I took the materials, I asked the questions without any professional help. I need to back up. And I asked myself these questions. And as I was checking off the answers and thinking about this, what I realized was that my intent to stay was at an all-time low. What kind of leader could I be with my intent to stay at an all-time low? This was frightening. I was scared. But after the beta and after talking with Susan, I began to realize in leading at a higher level, Ken talks about establishing your leadership point of view and your personal vision. And you know what? I had checked that off the list. I had come up with my leadership point of view. I got an A on it, Ken, you remember? Of course, he told us how it had to look before we took the test. But I thought I had it done. And then I realized, as leaders, we do not have the luxury of checking our leadership point of view and our leadership vision off and putting it on the shelf. We have got to have it out daily, weekly, practically minute by minute, because you know what? If we as leaders think that we are done developing ourselves and realizing our vision, if we think we're done, then as leaders, we're finished. So I worked on this, and I was able to break down again after months of soul searching, taking into account what optimal motivation had taught me through the beta and through lots of other conversations with Susan and her team. And I was able to boil this down, the essence of my leadership vision for myself. And I'd like to share that with you. First of all, I am called to lead a strategically aligned, values-focused, and member-centric organization with a unified and highly engaged employees that have a passion to serve. This company will set industry benchmarks for efficiency, safety, and social responsibility while contributing to the greater good. Now that sounds pretty wonky, and you have to understand that I'm an engineer by training. But for me, every lever that I need in optimal motivation is found right in that statement. I was pretty excited. And so what I did is I presented this to my board. And you know what I had to do when I presented this to my board? Is I had to tell them where I was. I had to explain to my board that my intent to stay was at an all-time low. And I didn't do this in a way that was threatening. I did this in one of those very honest and difficult and heartfelt conversations. And you know what my board said? Well, I'm still here. The board said, "We like what you're doing. We believe in you. So go do it." So I left the boardroom. I was flying high. I was spitting out strategy maps, employee communication plans. I was so optimally motivated, you probably couldn't stand to be around me. And then, in the midst of all this ramp up, I took a hard look at my last CEO 360. And this is a comment that was in there. Whoops. Mike needs to allow others to provide input and to help shape outcomes and have ownership before sharing his vision, his values, and his strategy. Here I was ramping up, flying high, I was on track, and then I realized that only by letting go of my ego and letting my team have more game time would I truly be able to realize the power of that unified vision. I wanted it bad, but I could only get it if I let go. Only by letting go would that vision become shared. Only by being shared would that vision be compelling, and only by being compelling would that vision ignite passion, and without passion, you can't change the world. I knew I heard my calling, my board believed in me, my team had gotten my attention, and yet there was a strange headwind pulling me back. I want to share a quote with you. As I was doing some soul searching, I ran across this quote from Parker J. Palmer. This quote says, and it comes from Let Your Life Speak, it says, "Before you tell your life what you intend to do with it, listen for what it intends to do with you. Before you tell your life what truths and values you have decided to live up to, let your life tell you what truths you embody, what values you represent." Now, what does that have to do with servant leadership? What does that have to do with how we can use the Blanchard programs to help us be better leaders, to make stronger organizations, and to serve our customers? I think if we are truly listening to our call as servant leaders, we are learning how to open ourselves up and listen to what our life is telling us. Situational leadership is a model. It's a construct where we as leaders let go of control. We learn how and when to let go of control, and we shift our thinking and our approach to draw others into leading themselves. The DISC model, the type and temperament, The diagnostic tools that tell us what our personality traits are also help us let go of control. We learn to step outside of ourselves and to be self-aware. We use those personality habits as a defense mechanism to help us maintain an appearance of control. Where we struggle as leaders, and that is evidenced by where we spend our energy, may not necessarily be obstacles we have to overcome. It may be our life telling us what it wants to do with us. It may be our life telling us where it needs us to go. And you have to listen. Listening like this leads to alignment. That place where what you are passionate about aligns with what you're good at, aligns with the service that needs to be done. This diagram and the red part in the middle is that alignment. Your talents, your passion, your service opportunities, where those align, that is where you can plant the seeds and harvest the fruit of optimal motivation. If we're not aligned, it's like grinding gears. Some of you may be old enough to know what a standard car is. If you're not in alignment, things are not going well. And you know what? Listening is important. Before my Blanchard experience and that comment in my last 360 would have been something I would have had to crush. But instead, I listened. I listened to that voice. I had to move forward. I had to change. And I had to put everything on the table to risk going back. In order to give up control, it's very difficult. And you know why it's difficult? Do you know why it is so hard to give up control? Because you don't get to do it once, do we? We have to give it up over and over and over again. And the thought of giving up control is absolutely frightening. And as you try to give up control, as you try to let your life tell you what it wants to do with you, you will hear a voice. And that voice will sound like your friend. It'll be very quiet. It will be non-threatening. And it will be whispering 3 words to you. And those words are, I am not. Servant leaders will have to battle the voice of I am not. If we get confused and we listen to that voice, our organization gets confused with us. That I am not will push the alignment. We will become misaligned. I am not good enough. I am not smart enough. I am not talented enough. I am not liked enough. I am not energetic enough. I am not patient enough. I am not outgoing enough. I am not quiet enough. My company is not big enough. My company is not small enough. My team is not smart enough. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. If we are going to reach our potential as servant leaders, we need to find the courage to change, and we must take on the headwind of I am not. You might have to tell I am not to go to hell. Because that's where it came from. That's where it comes from. If you're going to find the courage to change, you need to be mindful and self-aware. You need to remember that reflection is not for the weak of heart. Begin by changing yourself. Pay attention to those headwinds and do not listen to the voice of I am not. If we can do these things, we can lead at a higher level. I think we would all agree that if leadership was an Olympic sport, the Blanchard companies would be an elite training facility. Do you agree with me? Absolutely. The Blanchard curriculum teaches us how to lead better. If we were an athlete, we'd be shaving time off our performance. As leaders, we become more aligned, we increase our organizational effectiveness. Our company has been able to harness the power of the Blanchard curriculum with the strength of the co-op model, and we have quietly and incrementally improved our organization. Not all at once, not in one big day we just got better. We just tried to make it a little better today than it was yesterday, and to do that day after day after day. Over the next few minutes, what I'm going to share with you is some actual data that shows that. And we decided that feedback was crucial. At the executive staff, we knew we had to lead ourselves. We had to be good at leading ourselves, and we had to change. And I knew as a leader that I had to change first. I had to show my team how to change. If our employees would trust the staff and my team, we had work to do. Now, in the context of the DISC, in the context of MTBI, I am a dominant controller, a primary dominant controller, secondary steady relator, and if you haven't been brushing up on your DISC for the conference, that means that I am pushy and I don't negotiate until I figured out I'm not going to get my way, and then I become accommodating. Right, honey? Yeah. I wanted to change that. I wanted to be less intimidating. And so I looked at examples in my life of somebody that could coach me through that challenge. And I looked to my wife. Now, my wife, those of you that have got to know her, she loves little children. And they love her. It's magic. I don't know how she does it, but I figured, you know what? If I started working on little children, now bear in mind that I would be having adult supervision. If I could approach a child and make them like me, if I could approach a child and make them smile, maybe I wouldn't be so intimidating with grown-ups. So I asked Becky, how do you do this? And Becky said, well, it's really pretty easy. You have to bend down, you have to look them in the eye, and you have to smile and show them a little bit of teeth. Okay, I can do that. That's easy. So, we're at church, there's a little kid, Becky drops down, looks at the kid, smiles, next thing you know, Miss Becky, it's a hug fest. You'd think it was a Blanchard convention. Then she looked at me. It's your turn, Mike. And so I bent down, I saw that little kid, I looked him right in the eye, I said hi, and I smiled and I showed my teeth. Fortunately, he did not run screaming back to his mom, but it was not very impressive. And I, always being open for feedback, I asked my wife, I said, honey, what did I do wrong? And she said, well, you got the kneeling down part right. I said, yeah. She goes, what do you think about the smile? I said, oh, I was smiling. And she said this, the next time you smile, make sure and tell your face. That's just one example and a funny story of why leaders need to try to improve themselves. Why we need to be able to lead ourselves, because if we can't lead ourselves, we can't lead others. These numbers are from our survey results from 2007 showing a steady increase on the scores for the executive staff. I believe this is directly a result of the staff being able to be better at leading themselves. At the heart of the organizational success is communication, and the communication path between the supervisor and their team members is extremely important. We looked at the one-on-one and we learned about that, and we decided to try to implement that. And our experience with the one-on-one can't be better explained from hearing it from one of our team members, Anna Breeze. Help me out if you can back there.
Hi, I'm Anna Breeze. I'm an engineering clerk here at Powder River Energy. I've been with Powder River for 12 years. I'm here to discuss Powder River's one-on-one process. I feel that this has been a great tool for my supervisor and myself. We use this tool not only to gauge my progress throughout the year, but to help me be a more engaged employee for Precorp. I feel a lot more invested in my position and Precorp as well. In the beginning, it was used to basically let the employee have a forum to tell his or her supervisor what they liked, disliked about their position, where they were as an employee with Precorp, and what they were good or great at in their positions and how they could improve. We did these one-on-ones once a year, towards the end of the year. This process has changed considerably over the years. Now I have a chance to sit down with my supervisor not only one time, but an opportunity to set up several one-on-ones throughout the year. I believe that this allows me to stay on top of not only my progress in my position, but my personal goals that I have set for myself, but also the goals my supervisor has set for me. What a wonderful tool to have to keep us engaged and invested in Precorp.
Thanks, Anna. Early on, we considered one-on-ones a strategic initiative, and after several years, they're just now becoming part of our culture. I think that has actually helped improve our communication scores. And if you look at our communication numbers in our employee opinion survey, you can see a steady increase. Now, the results of our employee opinion survey are not always exciting. Sometimes they're scary. Last year, there were 4 questions that surprised me. They were so low, frankly. Precorp communicating honestly with employees, Precorp treating employees with dignity and respect, Precorp following through with its commitments to its employees, and the ES committed to building trust. None of these questions show up here, but I commissioned a team of employees to help me understand what this meant, to help me become closer to the team. And what I learned is that there were 3 things that were creating this very low scores. The first one was communications. The second one was communications. What was the third one? Communications, exactly. You know, in addition to having a good relationship with your supervisor, you have to be good working together as a team. During the course of the coal bed methane boom, we tried to improve our processes and our procedures, and we tried to implement a work management program that actually stressed all our team concepts. I'd like to hear from Marcy Brzezinski about our work management process.
I was one of the 4 people that was on the original work management team. We had 1 person from IT, 1 person from operations, 1 person from customer service, and I was from engineering. And we spent a lot of time in the beginning doing documentation, doing screenshots and typing up the follow-through on it. And then we went to the 3 different district offices and trained people in groups of 12. And I think they all just hated us because none of them had to do anything like this before. And it was way new.
It wasn't until we implemented the high-performing team model in our executive staff and in our work management team that we were able to achieve the breakthrough results we needed in order to implement this innovative work management process at our company. Things got better, and Marcy can finish the story for us.
We've had the work management in process for a couple of years now, and things are running pretty smoothly. It's been helpful for our members, owners, because now they can call into any of the offices and anybody can look up the status of their job. And we now have similar processes for getting things done that are similar across the service territory, which covers the whole northeast quarter of the state of Wyoming. So now, and we still, every now and then, tweak some little process or find something that's going to work a little better, but there's a whole lot less stress and hair pulling, and I think we look and sound a lot more professional.
So, by learning to lead ourselves, the staff improved. By learning to lead others, our communications improved. By learning to lead as teams, our company improved. And the results of that show up in our version of the service profit chain. This is actually a graph that shows superimposes my scores on my 360 with our employee opinion survey scores with our customer satisfaction scores as determined by the ACSI index. Now, obviously, there are things that happen in a company like huge storms that make power outages that make people mad. But overall, in 2010, this is where we as an organization were becoming confused. I mentioned to you that I decided to let go last year to try to engage our people along a vision for me that was compelling, and we called this revisioning. This revisioning process has involved about 30 people on our team, four of the team members are here, but I also have 4 staff people here that were part of this team. So thank you folks for the work that you've done. This revisioning process has helped move us along. And I'd like to just share a little video that starts to describe how impactful this has been.
When my work aligns with the company's mission, vision, and values, not only do I feel like I am on the right road, I also feel as if I am helping drive the truck.
Now, if you're from Wyoming and you get to feel like you're driving the truck, that is a pretty big deal. And you know why it's a big deal? Because if you drive the truck, you don't have to open any gates. So, by the end of the year, we'll have completed this revisioning process. And we went into a strategic planning retreat that took the work of this group, some 6 hours of video content, PowerPoint presentations, brainstorming, and the board and the staff and the employee team has developed this vision. Now, this vision is not the same one that I envisioned last year. This one is better. Let's hear from Libby talking a little bit about the revisioning process.
Being involved in the revisioning process has made me feel like I have a purpose and my efforts are being used to fuel the vision for our future. It makes me feel proud that my vision on values and how we achieve living those values will be incorporated into Precorp's vision and expectations for employees. I appreciate getting the opportunity to shape what Precorp will look like 10 years from now and throughout my future as an employee. I am proud that Precorp is taking continuous steps to improve as an organization. That's the type of business that I want to work for.
That's the kind of business I want to work for too. This journey that we've been on this morning, it's one leader's journey towards servant leadership. Thanks for letting me share it. Facing reality, finding the courage to change, and leading at a higher level. These are not unique to me. This is our story. This is our story. We can make a difference by putting service above self. We can face reality together. We can find the courage to change together. And together, we can lead at a higher level. Thank you.